A crisp fall evening in Manhattan. Outside a glittering Chelsea art gallery, an elderly man sits hunched on the sidewalk, sketching quietly under the neon glow of the city. Frank Remington's weathered hands move a charcoal pencil across paper. He's bundled in a faded army jacket. Wisps of gray hair escape a tattered beanie. Passers-by bustle past without a glance. To them, he's just another street artist lost in his own world. Suddenly, the gallery doors swing open. A small entourage steps out, laughter and chatter spilling onto the street. At the center is Grant Vellman, a 46-year-old tech millionaire in a tailored charcoal suit. With slicked-back hair and a gold watch glinting under the city lights, Grant exudes an aura of importance. He pauses on the sidewalk, bored eyes scanning for his limousine. That's when he notices Frank by the curb. Grant's lip curls in distaste. The upscale art event inside had bored him, but seeing a scruffy old man drawing right outside a prestigious gallery irritates him more. He strides closer, expensive leather shoes stopping just shy of Frank's scattered pencils. "Really? This is where you set up shop?" Grant mutters, voice dripping with sarcasm. Frank lifts his gaze slowly. His eyes are tired but calm as they meet Grant's condescending stare. Frank offers no retort, which only fuels Grant's irritation. Grant peers down at the sketch in Frank's lap. It's an intricate drawing of an emblem, a shield and dagger with a bold 75 in scrollwork. Grant doesn't recognize it. He lets out a short, derisive laugh. "What's that supposed to be? Some kind of random doodle?" he taunts, loud enough for his chuckling companions to hear. Frank's jaw tightens almost imperceptibly. The old man straightens up, and as he does, the sleeve of his army jacket slips back, revealing a tattoo on his forearm, the very same emblem from his drawing, inked years ago. Locking eyes with Grant, Frank speaks in a calm, gravelly voice. "No, sir. That's the insignia of the 75th Ranger Regiment." Grant's smirk fades instantly. The words hang in the air as if the city sounds around them have hushed. One of Grant's colleagues stops laughing. Grant's eyes dart from the tattoo on Frank's arm to the unwavering, proud look on the old man's face. 75th Ranger Regiment. Grant may know little about art, but he knows that name, an elite U.S. Army unit. The realization hits like a punch. A decorated war veteran is sitting at his feet, and he has just mocked the man's pride and service. A flush of embarrassment crawls up Grant's neck. His mouth opens, but no words come. Frank holds his gaze a moment longer, then lowers his eyes back to his sketch, dismissing Grant without anger. Just quiet dignity. Grant reels, heart pounding in his ears. In the span of seconds, his sense of superiority crumbles into shame. If you believe respect is earned by deeds, not dollars, then stay with us and look a little deeper. You won't want to miss what happens next. Later that night, after the confrontation, Grant's face burns with shame as he sinks into the back seat of his limousine. Through the window, he catches a final glimpse of Frank quietly returning to his sketch as if nothing happened. The driver closes the door, mercifully enclosing Grant in silence. Inside the plush car, Grant's hands shake as he loosens his silk tie. "What have I done?" he whispers to himself. The image of Frank's tattoo, 75th Ranger Regiment, and flashes in his mind, and a heaviness settles in his chest. The limo glides through Manhattan streets, but Grant's thoughts remain frozen on the sidewalk. His colleagues, sensing his mood, say nothing. In the dim cabin light, Grant's reflection stares back at him, troubled and hollow-eyed. He's a man used to having all the answers, yet tonight he feels utterly lost. Up in his penthouse, Grant paces before a panoramic window that overlooks the glittering city. Normally, that breathtaking view makes him feel on top of the world. Tonight, it only reminds him how small he's been in character. He rubs his eyes, but the knot of guilt in his stomach only tightens. Finally, unable to bear it, Grant grabs his laptop. With a deep breath, he begins typing into a search engine. Frank Remington, 75th Ranger Veteran Street Art, New York City. It doesn't take long to find a result. A local blog headline jumps out. From battlegrounds to brushstrokes, decorated ranger finds solace in art. Heart thudding, Grant clicks it. Up comes a profile of Frank Hawk Remington, 68, a veteran of the 75th Ranger Regiment, now known to sketch war memories on city streets. Grant reads how Frank served with distinction, how combat trauma forced him into early retirement, how art became his therapy. A faded photo accompanies the article. A younger Frank in dusty fatigues, cradling a rifle, eyes weary but determined. The caption, Sergeant. Frank Remington, Kandahar, 2002. Grant swallows hard. The man he dismissed as a nobody had once been a protector, a hero. Frank had risked his life in places Grant only heard about on the news and came home bearing invisible scars. Now, Frank lives quietly, sketching scenes of a past war while people hurry by, or worse, mock him. People like Grant. A wave of shame washes over Grant so strong he has to sit down. He remembers his late grandfather, a Korean war vet, and a lesson from his father. Some scars don't show on the skin. Grant always understood those words in theory. Tonight, he's seeing their truth. Sleep doesn't come easily. When Grant finally drifts off in the early hours, his mind conjures distant gunfire and a lone soldier's silhouette in the dark. He startles awake before dawn, heart pounding. He knows he can't undo his actions, but perhaps he can atone for them. The next morning. Sunlight finds Grant already on the move. Dressed in jeans and a simple navy sweater, a deliberate shedding of his usual tailored armor. He carries 2 cups of hot coffee as he returns to the Chelsea sidewalk where he left Frank the night before. The city is just stirring, and there Frank is in the same spot by a muraled wall, perched on a low stool with his sketch pad. Grant's pulse kicks up. Frank is drawing again, early commuters' faces taking shape in charcoal on his page. The old man looks peaceful, focused on his work. The hustle of morning foot traffic flows around him. Grant hesitates a few yards away, suddenly unsure of his plan. In his mind, he'd pictured marching up, handing over the coffee as a peace offering, blurting out an apology, anything to show his regret. But now, seeing Frank in person, Grant falters. His courage evaporates. What if Frank wants nothing to do with him? Grant hovers by a bus stop, heart hammering. He watches Frank finish a sketch, pat the charcoal dust from his fingers, and carefully tuck his drawing into a worn portfolio. Frank's movements are a bit stiff this morning. Grant wonders if the cold or perhaps old injuries make it hard for him to sit and stand. As the morning rush begins to ebb, Frank packs his pencils and sketch pad into a beat-up rucksack. Grant realizes this might be his last chance to approach before Frank leaves. Summoning all his nerve, he steps forward. But Frank suddenly pushes himself up and starts walking down the block. Panicking at the thought of losing him, Grant decides to follow at a safe distance. He trails the old soldier through the city streets, unsure what he's even looking for. All he knows is that turning away now isn't an option. I need to understand this man's life, Grant thinks. I need to make this right somehow. Little does Grant realize, he's embarking on a journey that will test everything he believes about pride and respect. He's about to see the world through Frank's eyes. What do you think Grant will find on this path of atonement? Have you ever misjudged someone at first glance? Share your thoughts below. Grant trails Frank into a quiet neighborhood park. Under a broad oak tree, an elderly couple at a volunteer food stand greets Frank warmly. "Morning, Hawk," the woman smiles, handing him a fresh bagel. "Thank you, ma'am," Frank says softly, accepting their kindness with humble grace. From a bench nearby, Grant watches locals treat Frank not as a vagrant, but as a familiar friend. Frank even breaks off a piece of his bagel to toss to a little squirrel, chuckling as it scampers away. The simple kindness of the act tugs at something in Grant's chest. This tough old ranger has a gentle soul, and Grant finds himself smiling despite everything. When breakfast is done, Frank strolls onward. Grant follows as Frank enters a modest veteran outreach center down the street. Not wanting to intrude, Grant peeks through a window into a meeting room. Inside, a dozen veterans sit in a circle of folding chairs. Frank is among them, speaking quietly as others listen. At one point, Grant sees Frank's shoulders stiffen and his head bow. A fellow vet pats Frank on the back supportively. Though Grant can't hear the words through the glass, he can see the pain and solidarity in that room. Frank isn't just carrying his own burdens, he's helping others carry theirs. When the session ends, Grant steps aside as the vets file out. A few clasp Frank's hand or clap him on the shoulder, saying things like, "Thank you, Hawk, and see you next week." Frank gives each a kind nod or a chuckle. Grant's eyes widen. Frank clearly plays an important, respected role in this little community of survivors. It's a side of the old man that Grant would never have imagined. By early afternoon, Frank heads toward a riverside promenade overlooking the Hudson. He settles on a bench facing the skyline and fishes out his sketch pad. Grant lingers a few yards away, watching discreetly. With deliberate strokes, Frank begins sketching the Manhattan skyline. But as the drawing develops, Grant notices something extraordinary. Within the charcoal outlines of skyscrapers, Frank subtly shades in silhouettes of soldiers. Tiny, ghostly figures in combat gear stand among the towers and along the bridge lines. An invisible battalion etched into the cityscape. A chill runs down Grant's spine. Frank is literally drawing his ghosts, honoring the comrades who never made it home, blending them into the world he lives in now. The drawing is beautiful and haunting, a silent story of sacrifice on paper. Grant swallows hard against the lump in his throat. In that quiet moment, he understands that Frank's art is his memory, his therapy, and his tribute. All of a sudden, a loud pop shatters the calm, a car backfiring on the nearby street. Frank flinches hard. His pencil streaks a jagged line across the sketch. In a blink, his distant gaze turns to terror. He's not in New York anymore. For a split second, that sound transported him to a war zone. Grant's heart lurches as he watches Frank's chest heave, his eyes wide and unseeing. But just as quickly, Frank closes his eyes and forces a slow, deep breath. "It's okay. It's over," he murmurs to himself, willing the ghosts away. After a few seconds, his trembling subsides. When Frank opens his eyes again, the fear has receded, leaving only exhaustion. He gently shuts his sketch pad, the unfinished drawing marred by a dark slash. Grant releases a breath he didn't realize he was holding. He has witnessed just a glimpse of Frank's inner battle with PTSD, and it leaves him shaken. Frank rubs a hand over his face and checks his watch, then pushes himself up from the bench. As he pockets his pencil, Grant notices a slight limp in Frank's step. Still, the old soldier squares his shoulders and moves on, carrying himself with quiet dignity through the pain. Grant continues to follow along a half-step behind. His mind reels at everything he's seen: Frank's kindness, his leadership among fellow vets, his private nightmares, and the profound beauty of his art. How many extraordinary people have I overlooked like this? Grant wonders. How could I have been so blind? The sun hangs lower in the sky as they meander back into the city's streets. They near a small playground where a handful of children are playing while a babysitter watches. Grant catches himself almost walking shoulder to shoulder with Frank now, his guard completely down. Suddenly, a bright red ball escapes the playground, bouncing across the street. In a heartbeat, a little boy toddles after it, giggling as he chases the ball between parked cars, directly into the path of a speeding delivery van. Tires screech, and a horn blares in panic. Grant's blood turns to ice, but before he can even shout, Frank explodes into motion. "Look out!" Frank barks, his voice commanding. In a flash, the 68-year-old launches forward with astounding agility. He grabs the child around the waist and spins, hurling them both out of the van's path with only inches to spare. The van skids violently, the driver wrenching the wheel. With a thunder of brakes, it lurches to a halt just shy of Frank's sprawled figure. For a split second, silence, then chaos. The little boy's terrified wail pierces the air as the babysitter screams and rushes toward them. Grant, who sprinted forward in those frantic seconds, falls to his knees beside Frank and the child. Frank is on one knee, arms still wrapped protectively around the boy. "It's okay, buddy. You're okay," he soothes, voice shaking as he loosens his hold. The boy, scared but miraculously unharmed, scrambles up and runs straight into his sobbing babysitter's arms. "You saved him. Oh my God, you saved him," the young woman cries, tears streaming as she clutches the child. She looks at Frank with gratitude bordering on reverence. Frank tries to stand, but a sharp hiss escapes him and he sinks back down. Grant sees blood seeping through a tear in Frank's pant leg. Frank has badly scraped or cut his shin on the pavement. A crowd begins to gather. A police officer, already nearby, rushes over, directing traffic away. Moments later, paramedics arrive, kneeling next to Frank. Frank insists, I'm fine. Even as a medic gently lifts his trouser leg to reveal a deep gash oozing blood and bits of gravel. Grant stays right by Frank's side, one hand on the old man's shoulder. He watches Frank grit his teeth, doing his best to hide the pain. Within minutes, the paramedics clean and bandage the wound. "You're gonna need stitches," one tells Frank. They recommend a hospital visit for x-rays too, just in case. Frank looks anxious and murmurs, I can't afford," but Grant cuts him off. "Don't worry about that, I'll take care of it," he says firmly. Meeting Frank's astonished gaze, Frank sighs, reluctantly agreeing when Grant vows to accompany him. In that moment, Grant was in awe of Frank's selfless courage. If this act of heroism touched you as well, consider subscribing for more stories that honor everyday heroes. Once Frank's leg is wrapped, the paramedics help him stand. They'll transport him if needed, but Frank insists he can walk with a little support. Grant immediately steps in, offering his arm. Frank, pride warring with the obvious pain in his leg, accepts, leaning against the younger man. As the commotion settles, the police officer finishes taking statements, and the crowd drifts back to their routines. Frank finally turns his full attention to the man holding him up. For the first time in daylight, he gets a clear look at Grant's face. Recognition flickers. The fancy clothes may be gone, but Frank recalls the sharp features and voice from last night. You were at that gallery," Frank says hoarsely, brow furrowed in confusion. His eyes search Grant's, finding guilt and concern there. Realizing the same man who mocked him is now literally supporting him, Frank's face hardens with a mix of hurt and puzzlement. "Why are you here? Why are you following me?" he asks quietly, an edge in his voice. Grant's stomach flips. This is the question he's been dreading and needing to answer. He opens his mouth, heart hammering in his chest. "Frank, he begins, voice raw with emotion, but the words catch in his throat. For once, the eloquent millionaire is speechless, standing on a city sidewalk with the very man he scorned now leaning on his arm. Grant realizes he has to answer, and what he says next will change both of their lives forever. Grant's throat tightened as he faced Frank's question. Gently, he adjusted his grip on Frank, keeping the injured man steady. "I'm here because I owe you an apology," Grant said quietly. "And so much more." He guided Frank toward his waiting car. Despite Frank's initial protests, "Really, I can manage," Grant insisted on helping him into the passenger seat. As he drove Frank to the hospital, Grant finally poured out everything. How ashamed he was for the cruel words at the gallery, how he couldn't sleep after learning about Frank's past, how following Frank all day opened his eyes. Frank listened in weary silence, the passing streetlights illuminating his impassive profile. Only when Grant confessed, voice trembling, "I'm so sorry for disrespecting you," did Frank turn to look at him fully. At the hospital, Grant stayed by Frank's side through every step, from the stitches, 7 of them, Frank later noted wryly, to the precautionary X-ray, a minor hairline fracture. Frank was bewildered by the attention. He'd long grown used to handling life on his own. But each time he muttered, "You really don't have to wait, Grant." The younger man replied softly, "I want to." True to his word, Grant handled all the paperwork and expenses before Frank even saw a bill. That night, Grant drove Frank to a clean motel and checked him in. Frank flatly refused to be a bother at Grant's penthouse. Before parting, Grant handed Frank the sketchbook that had fallen during the rescue. It was spotted with a few of Frank's blood drops on the cover. "I'll be back tomorrow," Grant said, unsure if it was overstepping. Frank, exhausted and overwhelmed, managed a nod and a quiet "thank you" for everything. Over the next few weeks, as Frank's leg healed in a cast, Grant visited every day. What began as duty grew into genuine companionship. In the mornings, Grant would show up with coffee and pastries. In the afternoons, he'd drive Frank to follow up appointments, or just to sit by the park for fresh air. Their conversations, awkward at first, soon flowed easily. Frank spoke of his army days, the intense missions, the brothers-in-arms he'd lost, the nightmares that still crept in when he was alone. Grant, in turn, opened up about his upbringing, his drive to succeed, and how empty he realized his accomplishments felt when measured against a life like Frank's. The two men laughed together. To Grant's surprise, Frank had a dry, infectious sense of humor, and somberly reflected together. An unlikely friendship took root, built on respect and understanding. One afternoon, as fallen leaves skittered across the sidewalk, Grant helped Frank hobble a short distance on his mending leg. They stopped outside a familiar art gallery, the very one where their paths first crossed. Frank raised an eyebrow, hesitating. "Don't worry," Grant grinned. "We're not here to attend another dull cocktail event." He pushed the door open, revealing the gallery interior dimly lit. Inside, the space had been utterly transformed. Framed drawings lined the walls on elegant easels and displays. Frank's eyes widened as he recognized the sketches. Scenes of soldiers silhouetted against desert sunsets, a patrol wading through rice paddies, a detailed rendering of New York's skyline with phantom rangers hidden among the buildings. The same drawing Frank had started by the Hudson. Grant had found the crumpled page and had it completed and cleaned up by a professional art restorer. Each piece bore Frank's signature. Soft music played, and a small crowd of people milled about, sipping punch and admiring the artwork. These were Frank's drawings, every one of them, and this was his gallery show. Frank stood rooted in shock. "Grant, what is all this?" he whispered, voice quavering. Grant rested a hand on Frank's shoulder. "This," he said warmly, "is your art on display, Frank. Your story." He guided Frank forward into the gallery hall. Immediately, the modest crowd turned their way, and a gentle applause broke out. They were friends from the Veterans Center, the volunteers from the park. The elderly lady waved excitedly, the young veteran with the prosthetic leg, even the little boy whom Frank had saved, now clinging to his mother's hand and grinning shyly. Word had gotten around through Grant's contacts and the local news. Tonight was a celebration of Frank "Hawk" Remington. Frank's cheeks flushed and his eyes grew misty as he slowly made his way past each drawing. He was seeing his life's work, the private pieces of his soul, presented like fine art. It was overwhelming. I don't deserve all this," he murmured. Overcome, a middle-aged man in a neat suit approached, one of Grant's associates, and gently handed Frank a microphone. Frank looked around in a panic, but the crowd's encouraging smiles gave him courage. Grant gave him a reassuring nod. Haltingly, Frank began to speak. He thanked everyone for coming, joked self-effacingly that he never imagined people would clap for scribbles I made to pass the time. The crowd chuckled warmly. Frank grew more serious as he glanced at one of his drawings, a portrait of a young soldier with a flag draped behind him. "Drawing helped me when I felt invisible," he said, voice cracking slightly. "It's how I remember the ones I lost and make sense of what I've lived." He paused to wipe a tear. "Seeing you all here, caring about an old man's memories, I have no words. Thank you." The audience broke into sincere applause, a few people dabbing their eyes. Grant stepped forward to take the mic next. He stood beside Frank, briefly placing a supportive hand on Frank's back. "I want to tell you all a story," Grant began, looking around the room. "Not long ago, I met Frank in the worst way possible. I disrespected him because I judged him by his appearance." A hush fell as he continued, voice filled with remorse. "I was blind, but Frank, in his patience and through his actions, opened my eyes. He showed me that true greatness often walks in silence. The world might ignore it or mock it, but it never disappears." Grant's gaze moved to Frank, who was staring at him in surprise. "Frank Remington is the greatest man I never knew I needed to meet. By daring to look deeper, I discovered a hero and a friend." The crowd applauded, some cheering softly. Frank looked down, wiping another tear, his face red but beaming with gratitude. Grant wasn't done. He announced, with clear pride in his voice, the launch of the Remington Fund for Art and Healing, a charity he had established in Frank's honor to provide free art supplies and therapy to veterans coping with PTSD. Frank's head whipped up in astonishment. "Your courage to face your pain through art inspired this, Frank," Grant said directly to him. "I hope it helps others find peace like you have." The room erupted in applause again, people nodding and murmuring approval. Frank was visibly moved. He looked at Grant with a mixture of disbelief and heartfelt appreciation. As the event wound down, Frank found himself surrounded by well-wishers. The young mother of the saved boy hugged Frank tightly, thanking him yet again with tearful eyes. Frank patted the child's back gently as the boy presented him with a crayon drawing labeled "My Hero" in shaky letters. It showed a caped figure, meant to be Frank, saving a stick figure kid. Frank laughed softly and ruffled the boy's hair, his heart full. Eventually, the gallery emptied except for Frank and Grant. Frank gazed around at the now quiet room, eyes landing once more on the sketch of the skyline with the ghostly Rangers. "You even kept this one," he said, voice tinged with wonder. "Couldn't let it end up in the trash," Grant replied. "It belongs to the world as much as to you." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, soaking in all that had happened. Finally, Frank turned to Grant. The millionaire noticed the veteran seemed lighter, as if years of isolation had been lifted from his shoulders. "I don't know how to thank you, Grant," Frank said softly. "You've done more for me than I ever expected from anyone." Grant shook his head. "I'm the one who needs to thank you. You've given me a perspective I lost, and a friend I didn't know I needed." Frank smiled, a genuine, warm smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He extended his hand. Grant clasped it firmly with both of his. In that handshake was everything: forgiveness for the past, gratitude for the present, and respect going forward. As they left the gallery side by side, the city that never sleeps twinkled around them. Grant offered Frank a ride home, and Frank, for once, didn't protest accepting help. They chuckled, realizing they were both heading to the same late-night diner. Grant had arranged an after-celebration coffee with some of the vets. So they walked, slowly, due to Frank's leg, but neither minded. The cool night air was refreshing as they moved down the sidewalk. A wealthy man in a suit matching pace with a veteran carrying a cane. Two individuals who, just a short time ago, existed in completely separate worlds, now connected by a bond of genuine friendship and respect. Grant glanced at Frank, and his mind flashed back to their first encounter. The contempt he'd shown, the dignity with which Frank responded. It felt like a lifetime ago. He realized, with a swell of humility, that Frank had given him a gift far greater than anything money could buy, a lesson in humanity. True greatness often walks in silence. Frank had always been great. Grant just hadn't bothered to see it. But he saw it now, shining as clearly as the city lights around them. In the quiet of that New York night, as traffic hummed and 1,000 strangers hurried by, Grant and Frank shared a simple conversation about which pie was best at the diner. Their laughter echoed down the nearly empty street. It was a small, ordinary moment, yet extraordinary, given the journey that led them there. True greatness often walks in silence. The world may ignore or overlook it, but it never disappears. Those who dare to look deeper will discover the real meaning of respect, and may even find a lifelong friend.